Well, welcome back, everyone. This is Sheepdog Smokey, and this is actually a surprise. It's a little bit of good news for the Second Amendment and those who support it out of California. Seems a federal judge has struck down the ban on magazines in California. Now, looking at this, it's not really a long article here. It says that a federal judge struck down a California law ban on magazines that are capable of housing more than 10 rounds because he said the law violated the Second Amendment. Judge Roger T. Benitez of the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of California issued the judgment on Friday afternoon and totally invalidated the ban. Individual liberty and freedom are not outmoded concepts, said Judge Benitez in the ruling. Plaintiffs contend that the state's magazine ban thus cannot survive constitutionally required heightened scrutiny, and they are entitled to declaratory and injunctive relief as a matter of law. He continued, plaintiffs are correct. Benitez added that the California law was turning the Constitution upside down. The National Rifle Association, NRA, hailed the decision as a victory for gun rights and for gun owners. Judge Benitez took the Second Amendment seriously and came to the conclusion required by the Constitution, said NRA ILA Executive Director Chris Cox. The same should be true of any court analyzing a ban on a class of arms law abiding Americans commonly possess for self defense and other lawful purposes, he continued. And then they have a local report, although it's not coming up. Not really a surprise based on just what I've been dealing with internet wise the last few days. The plain and simple truth is that the Second Amendment very clearly states we have a right to keep and bear arms. It does not say muskets. It does not say pistols. It does not say shotguns. It says arms. Because the framers of the Constitution had just fought a bloody war for independence from a country that did not want them to be armed in any way. King George was tired of the colonists telling him they didn't like that he was spending their money on things that did them no good. I understand as a taxpayer that not 100% of my taxes will be spent on things that directly influence me. I understand that. But if I was told that every tax dollar I sent, every cent of my taxes, was going to be spent only to bail out New York because of their failed policies, and Texas was going to be left to rot, I would be rightly upset. If I was told that every single cent of my tax earnings was going to go to build new housing communities for illegal aliens, I would be rightly upset. There is a phrase that came out of the colonists in that time, and that is no taxation without representation. The colonists had no voice in Parliament. The colonists had no voice to advise the king on what was needed in the colonies. Therefore, the colonists were being taxed and their money not spent on them. There was nothing being done. If you look at it in terms today, if we just assume that we found an area large enough to build several cities, and the state was taxing us and not providing the roads that they say they will provide, then that would be taxation without representation. But say the state had provided the highways to that town, residents had moved in, and the roads were dirt and unusable during inclement weather, and the city was taxing the people but not making sure that the roads within the city are usable, then that is taxation without representation. That's why cities have city councils. That's why counties have county commissioners. States have state House representatives, state senators, and the federal government has Congress as well. We send people to represent us. Ideally, they are to keep in touch with us so that we can have our voice heard. Unfortunately, most people get to DC and instantly think, well, I'm part of the elite. I don't need to talk to the plebs. That was very evident when the people of Alaska overwhelmingly told the federal government they didn't want the bridge to nowhere. But the federal government said, no, the money has been allocated. We're building that bridge. So the people of Alaska said, we don't want it. If I remember correctly, there was a lot going on in the country where emergency relief was needed, and they said, spend the money to help other Americans. And the federal government said, no, we are not reallocating that money. We're going to spend it on a wasteful program because we want to. Now, that ultimately changed and went in a million different directions, unfortunately, as legislation often does. But it proves that our congressmen are not listening to us. Right now, thankfully, we have a few people who do still understand the Constitution. We are not being stripped of our rights. Now, I realize I went on a bit of a tangent, but it does play into that the government is supposed to listen to the people, and it is supposed to uphold the Constitution. All of them swear an oath. Right now, I know of several who are violating that oath regularly. That oath is to support and defend the Constitution. The people in California had their state representatives decide, oh, well, sure, you can keep the rifle, but not the magazine. If you want, you can find any number of videos on YouTube where the concept of, well, they have a 30-round magazine, they're now horribly, horribly more deadly, is debunked. I saw one where a man fires using revolvers just as fast as someone who fires with a 30-round magazine because he has multiple revolvers. These do not have detachable magazines. The chambers are permanently affixed, even though they swing out. So, as opposed to having a rifle with 30 rounds in a magazine, he has 5 revolvers that carry 6 rounds each. And by simply dumping the revolver he just finished and grabbing another one, he fires off 30 rounds really fast. Another one shows someone using 3 10-round magazines, and they're still very fast. I know people exist all over the country who are extremely good at reloading on the fly. Yes, you don't see it that often because these people do it in competitions. But watch a 3-gun competition. Watch how fast they reload their 10 or 12 or 9-round pistol magazine. Watch how fast they drop and insert a 30-rounder into an AR. Watch how they grab 4 shotgun shells. And I'm not talking like this. They're literally lined out to where they just ram them into the barrel tube of a shotgun. They can reload a shotgun in seconds. And that is proof that it is not the inanimate object that is at issue here. It is the person behind it. I've watched police officers while they were training when I was a county sheriff's detention officer. They're able to drop and insert a magazine in under a second and a half, and those were the average people. The instructor, with his 9-round magazine in his concealed weapon, could fire over 30 rounds in less than, I want to say less than 7 or 8 seconds. He was not as accurate as he was when he took time, but he was still on target because he stays on target while he's firing, and he knows how many rounds he has. He drops the mag, and while he's dropping one mag, he's already got the other in his hand, knows where the mag goes, and he puts it in, racks the slide or releases the slide, and keeps firing. The number of rounds you can hold in a magazine is irrelevant. The AR-15 is not an assault weapon, and it should not ever be said that, well, I'm going to limit how many bullets you can have. There are other laws being said right now where people want to be able to catalog and register how much ammunition you keep. If I was an active competition shooter, which I hope to be in the next year or two, I'm going to need to keep hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of range brass rounds on hand. Because, of course, you don't use hollow points or other self-defense rounds for competition. You use range rounds. They're generally much safer on a range and cheaper as well. But imagine if I had to register 2 to 3 to 4 times a year that I need to purchase 500 to 700 rounds of each caliber I'm using in that competition. And then I have to go before a judge and defend that because of a hobby. Imagine, and this is actually real, that you live in a rural area, as I do, where coyotes, bobcats, and other predators are very common, which they are in this area. And imagine you don't want them eating your chickens or your dog or attacking your family, which I don't. That means I need to keep plenty of ammunition on hand, because I can tell you, having had to track and kill a coyote that was rabid but would not actually get near me, he just wanted my chickens. I missed several times because he's fast. They're fast. I winged him. He's still running. I winged him again. He's still running. It took me a good 10 to 15 rounds to put him down. And yes, one of those was after he fell, I put him out of his misery as fast as I could. This is an animal that is incredibly sick and incredibly dangerous. But if I have to justify keeping ammunition in my home for my constitutionally protected firearm to use to protect me and my family and my animals from predators, that means I'm left in danger while they decide if living near coyotes and bobcats is, well, is that really dangerous enough for you to be allowed to keep ammunition? They know they can't just outright say we're banning guns. They're trying, and they try and they fail, and they try and they fail. So they go after the magazines. They go after the accessories. They go after the ammunition. It will not be long before one of them actually openly states, well, yes, you can bear arms, but you don't have a right to ammunition. And they will say it on record, and then they will cry and whine about being targeted and bullied by the gun nuts because they just don't understand the intricacies of governing. And we're going to hear it more and more and more. Unfortunately, we have 535 members in Congress, and 90% or more of them don't care about the people they represent. One of the most dangerous cities in this country is in Kamala Harris's district. 9 of the 10 most dangerous are all totally run by Democrats. Look at those cities: Chicago, Baltimore. Look at Kamala's district. Look at San Francisco, run by Democrats. The right to keep and bear arms has been infringed on horribly in those cities. And what happens? Crime skyrockets. Look at Kennesaw, Georgia, where there is actually a city ordinance that all adults living in the city of Kennesaw, Georgia, must be armed and must train with it. Kennesaw, Georgia has had, I believe, 1 murder in 10 years. Look at Chicago, where people are prohibited from owning weapons. No, it does not say you may not buy them in the city of Chicago. It says you may not possess them. Therefore, you go across state lines, buy it, come back, you're a criminal. That's not a loophole. You broke the law. How many murders happen there in a weekend? The city where adults are basically required by law to be armed has had 1 in 10 years. Look at the red areas of the South where guns are very common. And you can take probably 9 or 10 or even 15 cities from the South and still have a lower crime rate combined than Chicago, where Rahm Emanuel has only had one good thing to come out of his mouth in a decade, and that is to say that the Jussie Smollett hoax and the ultimate end of it is a horrible thing. He travels around in armored cars with armed guards around him, lives behind a wall, but he tells his citizens that they cannot be armed. Hopefully this is the beginning of a pattern. This judge, Roger Benitez, has realized that no, you can't tell people that they can't have the proper accessories to use their firearms. Maybe he'll finally spark a trend of judges saying, no, I'm sorry, Mayor Emanuel, you may not pass city ordinances banning firearms from private ownership. That violates the Constitution. But I guess only time will tell if any of this ever comes to pass and if any of it ever does any good for the people being represented by people who have no desire to do it. They only want power and money. But I've talked long enough. Make sure and let me know what you think in the comments. Make sure to keep it classy and civil. I do not engage in arguments. I only engage in debates. Yes, you may leave an inane comment and I may reply, but if you prove to be not worth my time because you're going to use ad hominem and strawman attacks, or you're just going to use pointless comments, I just ignore you. Because we don't learn from arguments. We don't learn from being childish. We learn from debate, because debate forces both sides to do the research. As always, make sure to like the video and make sure to subscribe so you stay up to date on all of the content coming out. I do have several things I'm working on which branch out pretty widely from these videos, although there will always be stories I want to expand upon and expound upon greatly. So make sure you're subscribed so you stay up to date on everything. Until then, everyone have a wonderful rest of your weekend and a wonderful week next week.